Lisa. I am the VP of Programs, Su Futuro, at the HMBA, and I'm also a partner at Cypher Shaw in the Labor and Employment Group. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Navigating the legal profession goes beyond academics. It really requires mastering the unspoken rules of professionalism. And in this webinar, our esteemed moderator and panelists will share invaluable tips on making a strong first impression, building meaningful relationships, and standing out in your career. Today, we are honored to welcome Judge Leonardo Castro from the Court of Minnesota and also co-chair of our Judicial Division at the HMBA, Mariana Bravo, partner at Carr Maloney and past HMBA president, Carlos Boyar, partner at Archer and Greiner and past HMBA president, and Maria Dante Sanchez, VP and Regional General Attorney at Liberty Mutual and also GC at VIA at the HMBA. I am thrilled to have this distinguished group with us today. They really will provide a candid insights and practical advice without really sugarcoating the realities of our profession. Our goal is to see our community succeed, and the path to success lies in elevating and educating ourselves. So we will open the floor for questions at the end of the session. And with that, I will hand it over to our moderator, Carlos, to guide us through this very insightful discussion. Carlos, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mia. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this very important seminar. We have an all-star panel tonight, and I cannot wait to hear what they have to say about this important topic. So usually I like to start these things off with a quote. So here you go. In the practice of law, your reputation is your most valuable asset. And reputation begins with how you treat others. I think that one is spot on. So with that, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to dive right in, and we're going to start with Mariana. And the question for Mariana, why is legal etiquette important in the first place? Like, are we talking about, do we need to know how to use a shrimp fork or raise our pinky when we drink tea? Or is there a real practical impact on our careers and our professional life?
Thanks, Carlos. When I think about legal etiquette, and I think about, or any etiquette, quite frankly, and I think about the importance, I think what really hits home with me is that the reason why having etiquette is critical is because it conveys who you are. It conveys who you are as a professional. It conveys your values. And it conveys your integrity. And that can start with incredibly small things to larger things, including just being punctual. I've so often heard among our community, well, I was a little late because, it's just part of my community, part of my heritage. And that is something that I think we need to get away from. I think we really need to focus on being punctual because it does convey who we are. Communicating politely, professionally, critically important, dressing appropriately, being considerate, being respectful. And when you undertake using proper legal etiquette, it opens up so many doors. And that's another reason I think it's so important. It engenders trust and confidence among your clients, opposing counsel in the courtroom. It opens up conversations for folks to be collaborative, not be concerned about how you're going to respond. It's going to be predictable because there's a standard, there are norms of legal etiquette and just being respectful. And to your point, Carlos, being considerate. It also demonstrates tremendous emotional intelligence. And we hear that often when we're practicing in our family lives, professional lives. But I think that when you're navigating legal issues, whether it's litigation or a contract, you have to be able to communicate clearly. You have to be able to have emotional intelligence. And that's what legal etiquette demonstrates if you can incorporate that into your professional life. But ultimately, being polite, being respectful, being considerate in what you do shows who you are. And it really will allow you to professionally develop and also just maintain that reputation that is so critical in moving through your career.
All right, thank you, Mariana. Let's turn to the courtroom. Now, Judge, I'm sure there are nothing but the most civil and professional lawyers in the state of Minnesota, but Judge, what are some common mistakes you've seen people make inside the courtroom or in any legal proceeding? I'm sure you've seen the best of the best and the worst of the worst.
Thank you, Carlos. Let me just start off by saying that, maintaining decorum and proper etiquette in and around a courtroom is not merely kind of a superficial means of protecting the images of lawyers and judges. It's absolutely essential to the administration of justice. The look and feel of a standard courtroom generally are quite formal and imposing, and there's a good reason for that. The aesthetics of courtroom are the function of the public's respect for the administration of justice, as well as a manifestation of our understanding of the importance of the issues that are being presented and how decisions can impact the lives of those that appear before us. So the things we do and how we behave certainly are telling as it relates to the respect that we have for the administration of justice. And they can be really simple things, beginning with interrupting each other or the judge, speaking to each other on the record rather than addressing the court, being disrespectful or even dismissive of court staff, being disruptive while you're in the gallery and someone else is presenting their case, whether you're talking, whether you're reading a magazine, you're watching a video, whatever it might be. And of course, there's always a tire. Every jurisdiction has rules of decorum, and they might be as simple as wear the appropriate, attire, but understanding what that is, and both for men and women, is something that you need to become informed of, and because it is telling, I think, as Mariana was saying, of who you are. Informally addressing each other. I think it's important that we formally address each other while we're in court, particularly when we're on the record. Not being familiar with the local court decorum policies or even chamber preferences. There are multiple jurisdictions where if you go to the state websites of the Bar Association websites, you will find judges have listed what their chamber preferences are. Having that understanding. Let's just remember, I think as Carlos started off by saying, that first impressions are lasting in this profession. And so it's important that we avoid those mistakes. I think we've said it, we've seen people appear, with cats on the screen, and I'll talk a little bit about Zoom later and my fears of the results of Zoom, but keep these things in mind, that people are watching you all the time to make not only judgments about you, but judgments about the profession, the administration of justice, the trust and confidence in our court system. Thank you.
Judge, can I follow up with something specific? I mean, I want to keep some things practical. Rise when you address the court. Is that, I mean, it seems like an obvious one to me. It's one I see violated all the time. Is that something that will irritate the bench if you see it?
I think it'll irritate some judges. I think what can be appropriate is make the request. Does the court prefer that I rise when I address the court, or may I remain seated? I think understanding those rules and figuring out what they are before the day comes or the morning of, it is important to get that done. But the key is even being prepared at that, not only with your argument, but also at the etiquette level, at the decorum level.
I'll ask another follow-up question specific to my life. For men, button the top button when you address the court?
If you can, that would be appropriate. Yeah, and clearly wear a tie and button the top button of your shirt. That irritates me for men. Now, I will say I find it a little more difficult to address women in the attire I generally stay away from doing that, but generally women judges will address women in their attire. So and again, for women, it might even be at some level more important because you're dealing with so many other issues, being in the profession, that you don't need that to get in your way.
Last thing before I leave you, Judge, you actually told us something in our prep session that I thought was really smart on your part, and that is sometimes how you address it. How do you do it? Don't you send a staff person in there to deal with it, with at least for attire and for hats and things like that?
Right. I do that. So I'll either have the court clerk or my law clerk go out if it's Zoom, address the folks that are in the Zoom session, or if it's going out into the courtroom. And if they see that someone doesn't have their sport coat on, or someone's in the gallery with a hat on, and try to address that, because the last thing I want to do is embarrass folks. But if I end up coming out and I see someone wearing a hat, or I see someone not having their, the shirt, the top button on their shirt unbuttoned, I'm gonna address it.
All right, thank you, Judge. All right, we're going to go to Maria. We're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk about the interview process. Young lawyer, law student, their resume is perfect. They're dressed to the nines. They've got a great GPA, but they show up for the interview. What are some important things to keep in mind from an etiquette standpoint, or from a avoiding mistake standpoint, when you sit down for that important interview? Maria? Oh, you're muted, Maria.
My apologies. So the interview process, you're lucky if you get it, right? So you can't blow it because you won't make it to the second. So some real basic things: arrive early. Don't time yourself. Make sure that you allot for traffic, for parking. Do your research. If you're going to be in downtown and parking is going to be a problem, don't risk it. I want individuals that I interview to be in my office waiting 10, 15 minutes. I would say that any longer than that may be a little awkward, but time yourself. If you get to the building a little too early, maybe wait around a little bit and get into the lobby about 15 minutes before the interview. I think that would be appropriate. I would say dress conservatively. Don't wear a flashy color. If you're a female, don't wear your mini skirt. That's not the place to wear the mini skirt. I'm sorry. I'm telling you as a mother, no low cut blouses. You don't want to distract whoever's interviewing you. I try to suggest to the young lawyers and law students that I mentor, avoid flashy colors. You want it to be focused on what you're saying and what is being transmitted, not what you're wearing. So these are some of the basics. Come in with a smile. Be nice to the secretary, because you never know. I mean, guess what? When I interview someone, I used to always ask my assistant, what did you think about that person? I wanted to get their feedback on what they thought. So you never underestimate who it is that you're meeting along the way to get to the office of the person who's actually going to interview you. While you're in the interview, listen carefully. Sometimes people get very nervous, and I get it, but listen carefully, answer the questions. Don't interrupt. Wait until the speaker finishes. These are real basic things, but you'd be surprised. People forget this. I always coach individuals. Don't ever talk bad about a prior employer or a prior person. That's the kiss of death with me, because I figure the day they leave me, they'll talk bad about me. So don't bring negativity into the interview. Sometimes it helps for you to practice with someone a little bit, and if you actually are going into a job interview that, say, maybe a recruiter was able to line up for you or something, do your research also on dress code. I'll tell you a little story. There's a recruiter that I know, a good friend of mine, and she was telling me a story the other day. She said, I sent this amazing applicant to interview with this company, and it's kind of like a progressive type law firm. They do IP and IT and all these techie things. And the individual showed up with a suit. I mean, very respectful guy, he did the right thing. Well, the partner called her and said, well, I don't think he's going to fit our crowd because, he came in a suit. That's just not who we are. We're much more relaxed. She was like, he did that out of respect. The recruiter was like arguing for him. I think that maybe you need to do your research, know your audience. I'm not suggesting you show up casual to every interview, but depending on the crowd, maybe the suit won't be the right thing to wear. You can wear something in between. You don't want to be super relaxed with torn jeans and a t-shirt, but if the dress code is maybe business casual, you could wear like maybe a shirt and pants. So do your research in terms of dress code. It's generally speaking, I would say business is appropriate, but there are those exceptions, right? So keep that in mind. And then the final thing I will suggest to you is do your research. It's such a turnoff for me when people come and interview with me. And, I'm in a capacity where I oversee the legal department to Liberty Mutual, and people interview with me and they think that they're going to be doing insurance work in the sense of actually looking at, that's not what we do. We represent policyholders. Like, do your research, know that we're litigators, right? So know something about the person that's going to interview you. Know where they went to school, what their career path is, because that will open the door to having more casual conversations. A lot of the times, I have the resume. I know where they went to school. I know all about the individual. I want to know about them. I want to know about what interests them. So be prepared to have some casual conversation. And that's often enabled when you know a lot about the company that you're interviewing for, the firm, the person who's interviewing you. So do your research. Go prepared. I mean, these are just some basic criteria. I'm sure you've heard them, but sometimes it's worth repeating. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with doing some trial runs. If you have a mentor, and even if you're an accomplished attorney, I have attorneys that are a friend of mine said, I've got an interview. Would you mind sitting with me and going over some questions with me? And it helps. It helps to play it out. So be prepared, especially if it's that important interview that you got that you probably didn't think you were going to get. You don't want to blow it because it's one opportunity.
Maria, let me follow up with you, and anybody else who wants to chime in. Is it possible to over-research? I've had a couple of interviews where they ask a question. I'm like, how do you know that? Like, hey, I saw you were born in Nyack, New York. Me too. And I'm like,
use common sense and good judgment. There's some things that maybe you don't want to do. So I get what Carlos is saying. Maybe you're like, wow, but I actually get kind of impressed by that. Somebody who really looked it up and realized that I have a passion for mentoring, for example. So I know that they did a little research. They're passionate about the job. That doesn't turn me off very much. I don't think you should get into something too personal. I mean, you have to just gauge it, so know how to read a room, know how to read the person who's interviewing you. Sometimes you have multiple people. And, I know that I don't want to monopolize too much of the time. We have so much to go over. But keep in mind that I'm talking about the traditional interview. You have interviews sometimes where they ask you to go to lunch, and you're in a social setting. And that's a whole other set of criteria that you have to be cognizant of. And what are the right and the wrong things to do. And maybe some of our other panelists, as we get into other topics, we can talk about that.
All right. And I'll add one last thing before we move to the next question. When that is right before the interview, after you get there, check yourself in the mirror. Go to the bathroom, check yourself out in the mirror. I can't tell you how many people get there and they're doing half the interview this.
Good point, Carlos.
Flies down. You do it one.
Yeah, good point. Absolutely. Good one. And then the final thing I'm going to say, please send thank you notes. I mean, when I interview someone and I don't hear back from them, I'm like, oh, they weren't interested, so make sure to send that thank you note. The follow-up note is critical.
All right, let's turn to a topic for Mariana that we can put to use next month. Let's say you happen to be attending a professional conference. Let's say it's the HMBA Corporate Counsel Conference in Atlanta, March 19th through 21st, as I'm sure everyone on this call is going to do and register for. Mariana, what are some things to keep in mind? How can it go wrong from a protocol, from an etiquette standpoint?
Well, I think just starting off, when you go to a conference, I think you should have objectives before even going, weeks before, identify why it is that you're going. Well, are you going there for the legal education? Are you going there to network? Are you going there to see friends? Most of us who go for all those reasons, but I think it's important to plan ahead and, have an objective. Networking is critical, and in networking comes etiquette, legal etiquette, professional etiquette, personal etiquette. And so you have to be very mindful of some of the things we've already discussed. Our conferences, for those of you who may be joining us this evening who have never been to one of our conferences, they're wonderful. They're incredible. They're loads of fun. And there are a lot of after events, after educational events that sometimes go long into the night. And you have to be mindful. You know, you are in a professional environment. You may be with friends, but you have to be really focused on the fact that your reputation is every minute that you are with your professional colleagues and friends. And you know, to use one of Maria's words is branding. You really have to be focused on your brand, you know, as you're navigating conferences. You know, how do you want to be perceived? And it's important that you are perceived as a professional, you know, as a courteous, thoughtful, mindful professional. Obviously, at some events, folks enjoy having a beverage. You know, we often talk to our law school students and young attorneys to be very careful about that. You always want to be clear-minded. You want to be focused on your wellness and health. You want to ensure that if you're out for the evening or even at one of HMBA's events, that you present professionally. And that means not going bananas. You know, do that on your personal time if that's what you prefer. But I've seen it happen, sadly, you know, at times at different conferences. So it's something to be very deliberate and intentional about. The only other thing that I would really encourage all of us to always do is at these conferences, as part of our courteousness and consideration, is to look out for one another. You know, we really have to always be there for each other, whether you're looking out for a fellow student or your colleague, whoever it may be. Be very, you know, vigilant about ensuring that you watch out for your friends and your colleagues. And finally, you know, my dear friend April Troy, who's on the executive committee of the HMBA, she told me a story about being a croissant. These conferences are very large, and I hope many of you are going to go next month. But being a croissant is keeping your arms open. You know, don't go into those circles and close out folks who may not know other individuals at these conferences. So be a croissant, keep your arms open, invite others in while you're at these conferences, which again, I think just goes to the core of legal etiquette, which is respect and consideration and thoughtfulness. And, you know, there's so many other things, but ultimately at the end of the day, you have to think about how you're projecting your reputation, your professionalism, and ensuring that you have clear intentions when you go to these conferences.
I love that. Be a croissant. I'm gonna.
It's not much. I have to give that to April, but it's.
I love donuts, but no, they're closed off, right? So, all right. So this one here's a question for me. I'm going to take this one myself. We always hear about the importance of civility and professionalism during interactions with adversaries, or where people may be hostile, whether it's a client or something else. You know, practical tips when the person you're dealing with is a jerk. Many of us have been in this situation, particularly with opposing counsel, or maybe you're in a deposition and the witness is getting hostile, right? These are difficult situations. What you should not do is respond in kind. Take a minute. If you're somebody like me, you know, the instinct to respond right away and get hot is there. But sometimes you got to take a minute. You've got to compose yourself, pull back. But it's also important to make your record. I like to document my position. If it's an email or a written product, you know, I make it clear that regardless of whatever hostility or tone or nastiness that's coming at me, I make my record. I don't let the hostility deviate my plan from what I want to say, what I want to do, representing my client. You can't let them shake you off your game. Sometimes what they're trying to do is be hostile on purpose, right? They want to shake you from your position. But you got to document the unprofessional behavior sometimes too. And it's a verbal interaction, or you're following up via letter or email. Sometimes it's important to make a note of what they did, how they said it, how they did it, and why it's important. If it's on the record, sometimes you get yelling and carrying on, and that's not apparent on a written transcript. And I like to make a record, say something like, "Counselor, you're yelling and screaming and you're trying to intimidate my witness, and that is not appropriate. You're harassing the witness, you cite the rule." Sometimes the bad behavior's on a break. That's happened to me a couple of times where opposing counsel says something nasty off the record. And I go back on the record, put it right on the record. I say, "Counselor, you said something rude while we were on a break. Here's what you said. And I want the record to reflect that you're behaving in this way and you're carrying on." But summing up, do not respond in kind. Do not escalate. Do not let it alter you from your plan. Document the bad behavior and move on. And sometimes the conduct rises to the unethical. And if that's the case, you document that too, and potentially you may have to report it. You got to check your local ethics rules on that. Anybody want to add to that? Anybody have their own thoughts or no? If not, I'll move on to
Carlos, just one real quick thought. When I was a young attorney, I had a judge once say to me, "Just envision everything that you document with a big exhibit on it. It says Exhibit 1 to be introduced in court." So just be mindful that everything you write down, whether it's text or anything, may show up as an exhibit one day. Whether you're an attorney or a witness, it doesn't even matter. But I'm very mindful of that, whether it's, whatever communication. So just think about that big exhibit label on whatever it is that you're communicating and whether it's reasonable and professional.
We got a question on this topic, just came on in from our April Toy, our croissant expert, as to what do you do if you have a hostile judge? And I'll endeavor to answer that, and I invite my panelists to contribute. That's a tough situation, right? If you've got a hostile judge, I don't think you deviate from what I suggested. You make your record as calmly and as professionally as you can. If the behavior of the judge rises beyond the simply hostile, sometimes you get a judge who doesn't like you. Sometimes you get a judge, never happens to me, of course, but sometimes you get a judge that doesn't like your client. That's happened to me quite a bit. Or you get a judge that doesn't like the position you're taking. And they can get nasty. They can snap at you. It's fine. Let it roll off your back, make your record, and move on. And there's not much more you can do. Not much more you can do in that situation. That's why you have appellate judges. That's why you have assignment judges who are in charge of other judges, assignment judges here in New Jersey. And so if it rises to something that's truly abhorrent or truly unethical, then it violates the canons of judicial ethics, then you can report them if necessary. But tread lightly. That's my advice there. Anybody want to add to that?
Can I just add that judges have bad days too, right? And so you never know what's going on in other people's lives. So, we all should give each other a little grace when we find someone that's either having a difficult time or is being difficult. At the same time, I totally agree with Carlos. You are there as an advocate, you are representing a client, make your record, and maybe there's an opportunity later on, perhaps when the case is over, is to meet with that judge. I think you'd be surprised how many people, on how many judges, should I say, would be willing to accept that talk and that constructive criticism and learning about how they behave, because one of the things that we rarely get is feedback, and it's important that we hear it and we learn from it as well. So I'm not going to say that everybody's going to take kindly to it. Don't get me wrong, but I think most of us would kind of appreciate knowing that we were either not having a good day and recognize that and figure out what we need to do to deal with it. I mean, for instance, my staff, we have signals when they see that I'm about to blow my top, right? So they provide me with a signal, and then we can take a little break, and then I can deal with it. But that's just a suggestion.
All right, thank you, Judge. We're going to go right back to you. Changing topics. So much of our interactions these days are by email or Zoom. Zoom court is a regular thing. You mentioned it earlier. Other than accidentally turning yourself into a cat, what are some common mistakes you see in the Zoom world?
Well, I mean, Zoom and email world, I guess, but let me start off with Zoom. All right. And let me say that I appreciate the benefits that remote hearings have brought, to our justice system, especially in the areas of access to justice. Being able to attend, a 15-minute hearing without having to take a day off of work, and I'm, speaking about, defendants and plaintiffs, or not having to find daycare for your child, or not having to travel at the client's expense. I mean, I recognize that those are all potential benefits, to having remote hearings. However, we need to make serious and conscious adjustments on how we present and communicate via email and Zoom. I fear that if we don't, the profession and trust and confidence in the court will suffer. I'm also concerned about new lawyers and the development of new lawyers and not being in a courtroom. I think that as for those of you who serve as mentors, that you do everything you can to get your lawyers, if it's what you practice, of course, to get your lawyers in a courtroom. There's the lawyers that graduated in 2000, in 2020, didn't get to be in a courtroom for quite a while, for years, for some of them, and I think that hinders their development. So what I want you to keep in mind, because I think that remote hearings hinder developing relationships, and again, ours is a profession of relationships. Okay, it's too easy these days to accuse each other of misrepresentations and lying. All right, Zoom is allowing us, frankly, to be a little meaner to each other, and my perspective on that is that because we haven't been able to develop those relationships, because you don't develop the relationship by simply making your arguments and not being able to talk to each other about things like where you went on vacation, about how your kids are doing, or what your hobbies are. So it's difficult to develop those relationships. So we need to make an effort to spend some quality in-person time developing our relationships with our colleagues, developing our young lawyers. And as Carlos said earlier, don't respond in kind when someone is treating you disrespectfully. Be the better person, be the better lawyer. It does not make you a better advocate, trust me, when you attempt to lawyer yourself to the level of opposing counsel. Make an effort, if possible, to meet with your adversary and learn something about them not related to the law. Again, it's going to take an intentional effort to overcome some of these unintended consequences of remote hearings, but we need to find the right balance. And again, at the end of the day, it's about respect in each other, about trusting each other, and developing those relationships.
Judge, let me follow up with a specific question on behalf of people with young kids out there, especially during the COVID days. There are parents who struggle to find situations with their young kids. I know one attorney, exceptional attorney, who's just didn't have childcare, and sometimes the kid would barge in, sometimes even if they were in court. Is there a sympathetic ear to the court? Like, do you excuse situations like that? Is that okay, or do you think that young parents really need to be vigilant and figure something out?
Well, I think there's both. right? I mean, I think there are circumstances when you need to be home, right? Your child is sick, you couldn't find someone to care for them, and you needed to be home, and those things will come up. But you also have to plan and be prepared. I mean, prior to remote hearings, what would you have done, right? I mean, cancel the hearing or had someone cover for you. So I think we have to be prepared, but I also do think that the bench has to be sympathetic and understanding of the circumstances out there.
All right, thank you, Judge. Um, Maria, we know it's 2025. It's really important these days to be and respect your authentic self, right? So does it matter what you wear? Does it matter how you look? Is a nose ring, punk rock hair, is that okay in these days? What do you think? What's
Well,
that line?
there's a time and a place. You can be your authentic place, authentic self in a private setting with your family, your friends, when you're comfortable, but you have to know your audience, there's certain decorum and how we appear. I think Mariana spoke to this, and it's critical, if you're in a business conference, that's not the place to wear the earring and to wear the flashy clothes. To me, that's the first judgment that people make on other individuals is usually their appearance. I mean, whether right or wrong, but it's the truth. So you have to be aware of that. And when, and I'll speak a little bit more targeted to the actual conference that many of us will be attending. Generally speaking, during the daytime, I notice that most people are wearing a business suit and attire seems to be appropriate. But then we go into the evening hours and I see what sometimes the individuals are wearing and the way that they behave, and it's wrong. Because you know what? When you're in a business conference, you are on stage, on an interview 24/7. I'm looking, I'm seeing how people are behaving, what they're wearing, and it really does have an impact. So I know that there's this whole freedom of self and people want to be authentic and they think, well, if they don't take me for what I am, then I want to be part of that organization. Well, then you're going to suffer the consequences. I do think that it's inappropriate to appear in certain settings the way that I sometimes can see younger individuals either dressing or conducting themselves. So you just have to understand that there's a price for everything. If you want to be that person, then so be it. I was telling the panel as we were getting together that I have heard very accomplished professionals even speak on this. Individuals who now tend to be more colorful and they dress, in a funner way. And I remember this particular person saying, you can do this once you reach success and you no longer need to impress people. And I would even caution that that's true because, I will tell you, I mean, I've been an executive with Liberty Mutual for many, many years. I don't show up to Boston wearing, some crazy outfit because that's just not the culture. I still wear my business suit. There's a time and a place for everything. And yes, I'm Hispanic and I love to wear things sometimes that are a little bit more colorful or, perhaps a fun dress. But that's not what I'm going to wear when I'm coming into my home office headquarters. You just have to understand that there's decorum in terms of how you're going to look, and people are going to judge you as such. So, I mean, I tend to be quite conservative in that respect. I know that nowadays it is very common for people to have earrings in strange places, and I of course I respect the fact that some people want to use tattoos, and that's okay. But remember that there are going to be consequences, whether we like it or not. And we said we're going to be really transparent. You guys are familia, okay? So I'm going to be just very direct with you. If you decide you want to do tattoos up to your neck and down your hands and on your face, some companies may not feel that you represent the image that they want to represent to their clients. If you have your discreet tattoo that you can cover up with your suit, we're good. That's your personal decision to do that. So, be mindful of the decisions that you make. A tattoo is a very permanent thing. If you're going to put it in a location that's going to be visible despite you wearing a business suit, some people may not like it. If you want to wear a nose earring, like I think Carlos told us the story,
Yeah, it's hearing,
You
right?
know, they may not like it. So listen, it's all a decision you have to make. It's a personal decision. And yes, you know, some people would criticize me and say that I'm too conservative, but I'm being realistic. I mean, when people come interview at my office, I look at them and I'm like, is this the person that I want to see in court representing our clients? Is this the person that I want to see go into my corporate clients' boardroom and present on a case that they're defending for them? You know, you have to ask yourself that question.
I'd like to add something here. And, we're in the business of persuasion. And whether it's a judge, a jury, a client, prospective client, opposing counsel, everything we do is geared towards getting someone else to do what we would like to have happen.
Mm.
And we have a lot of tools at our disposal. We have our words, but our appearance is a factor. If someone's going to be paying you significant money, whether it's a salary or per hour, to go and represent them, they get to decide who is that person who is representing them in court or in front of a jury. If you're standing in front of a jury in Omaha, Nebraska, and you look like you just stepped out of a punk rock bar in New York City, you're not going to be as persuasive. And so you've got to factor that in. What kind of clients do you want? Do you want a petroleum executive from Houston, Texas, to pay you $1,000 an hour to go represent them? Well, then you've got to factor in what their expectations are. If you don't care about that, then you can look however you want. But exactly what Maria said, it's, there are going to be repercussions, and you get to choose to accept those repercussions or not. All right. Back to the judge. Everybody has a boss, right? Unless you work alone.
Yeah, the
And-
people.
and many of us have people that work for us. And you don't have to belabor this. I think this should be relatively obvious to most people. But what are some important considerations when dealing with superiors and or subordinates?
Well, I'm former military, so my perspective may be a bit more hierarchical than others. But fundamentally, of course, it's about treating each other with dignity and respect and setting appropriate boundaries. Communicating with superiors, the word that you use, I would say, first of all, be clear and concise. Your bosses are busy. They don't have time for long-winded explanations. It's important to get straight to the point, in my opinion, be clear about what you're trying to say. Also, when communicating with them, use the appropriate tone. Be respectful and professional, of course, but don't be afraid to speak your mind. You speak confidently, but avoid being confrontational, avoid being aggressive. Also, as has been stated a few times now, know your audience. It's important to learn about their communication style, their preferences, adapt your style accordingly. Some bosses prefer written communications, while others prefer face-to-face communications. Know that, study it, be prepared for that. And of course, accept feedback and be willing to learn from it and put it to practice. And finally, with everything that we do, be prepared. This means doing your research, gathering the necessary information, anticipating questions, anticipating concerns that they may have. Being prepared will certainly help you to communicate more effectively and confidently. On the other side, as it relates to bosses, it's important for them to be approachable to their subordinates. Be open to their ideas, their concerns, making yourself available to listen to them. Encourage open communication. Create an environment where everyone feels comfortable expressing their opinions. Also, provide a clear direction. Make sure your instructions are clear, easy to understand, avoid using jargon, technical language that your subordinates may not yet fully understand. And the opposite of accepting feedback is offering feedback. It's a crucial part of effective communication with subordinates. They don't know what to fix. You don't know what you don't know, right? So tell them, offer them positive and constructive feedback on a regular basis. I think this will help them. This will help their development and their skills. And listen actively. Make sure you're really listening to what they're saying and ask questions to clarify their concerns or their ideas. I think these are the things that I have listed that I think that would be helpful.
Right. I'll add one thing before we go to the next thing, which is treat subordinates with respect. Absolutely. Just because someone doesn't have the same position you have doesn't mean you get to treat them like dirt. In my 27 years of practice, the most angry I've ever gotten with my colleagues, my associates, have been when I see them treating a secretary or a paralegal or sanitation staff with disrespect, and it infuriates me. And that's how everybody should be as a rule. That's how we do things in my office, and it's a good way to get in trouble and tank your career, frankly.
Can I add just one more thing that you mentioned there, because it happened twice this week in court? Don't blame your staff for your mistakes, okay? You can deal with them if they made an error, behind the scenes in your office and work with them on correcting that. But don't tell me that your secretary forgot, or your paraprofessional forgot to file something or forgot to do something. That's not helpful to me. That actually hurts your position, doesn't help. Take responsibility for the mistake and move forward and correct it in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, we're going to go off script for a second, and I'll open up some of the questions that we've gotten from people in the audience. And Mariana, you're next up on the board, but anybody wants to chime in here. And I think two of these questions are related. I'll read them. I'm not sure if everybody can see all the questions. I have no idea how technology works. So I'll go ahead and read it. What would you say is the balance, if any, between keeping our Latino identity in the profession versus assimilation? And then the second question, which I think it is related, how does one help a colleague who is struggling with navigating the gap between Latino familia and corporate America without denying his or her own heritage? I'm thinking of from how to speak, sit at a dinner table, to eat, drinking at events, etc. I think those two questions have some overlap. Who wants to take a shot at this first? Going once. If not, I'm going to come in and ruin.
Let me just say, Carlos. First of all, excellent questions. And real to the profession. I think that folks that don't. The unknown can be scary to people. All right, so I think the folks you're dealing with sometimes are just as concerned about them making a mistake or saying something inappropriate. And so it's a level of establishing some trust and educating each other on how to maneuver this, because it can be difficult, and there's a really good question. So that's what I would say. I mean, understand that the person that you're dealing with might fear that they may say something wrong or do something wrong.
I'll contribute a little bit here too. And look, code switch is a real thing. We all do it. There's we make fun of some of my colleagues for the code switch. They could be mad, on a FaceTime on the side venting, and they are, with all due respect, they're ghetto as hell. And then all of a sudden, I talk to a client and they sound like Clarence Darrow. That's just how it goes. Sometimes there's different sides to everybody. You're not just one thing. And you've got to just learn how to behave in the workplace in what the culture of that workplace is. That being said, that does not mean you leave your Latino heritage behind. There's certain things, and by the way, I resent the fact that your Latino heritage means you got to be unprofessional or inappropriate. We have, people who behave exceptionally professionally well all across Latin America. There's rich people and there's poor people and there's everything in between, in all our ancestral countries. So you gotta look around, find a mentor, find somebody who's navigated this space, who understands what will turn people off, or what being your authentic self, how you can be your authentic self and not tick people off. I'm still trying to convince my coworkers that it's part of my Latino heritage to be given an allowance to take a nap every day, a siesta right after lunch, but they're not buying it. That's my perspective on it. Anybody else want to join in? Yes, no? Okay, all right. We'll move on to the next one. There's some great questions here. We probably should have started with these questions. This is one I'm going to go to somebody who is maintained the most professional face of anybody I've ever seen in the HMPA. That's Mariana. Any advice I have received is to practice my face, e.g., remain professional and don't show my emotions, especially when dealing with clients. Do you have any tips on how to practice my face so that when we get to clients and meetings in court, one can remain professional and focus on the topic at hand? I am not a good person to answer this. I do not have a good poker face. You can usually tell what I'm thinking and how angry I am by looking at my face. Mariana, you always look calm and composed. How do you do it?
Well, I actually am quite emotional, and it's taken a lot of I would say experience and development and maturity, and I haven't mastered it, that's for certain. I still face times where it's hard to maintain your emotions, and I think we have to understand that about ourselves. But the more comfortable, the more confident, the more experiences we have, I think the more growth you'll have. And I have certain techniques that work for me personally. They don't necessarily work for other people, but part of it is, as I said, just experience. And we're all going to make mistakes, and everything that we're sharing with you today, I'm sure we have each violated some of these great pieces of advice that we've given you at some time or another when we were younger lawyers, or even more seasoned attorneys, maybe last week, whatever it may be. But give yourself some grace on the emotion. You are who you are, and that's quite frankly why folks are hiring you. That's why folks want to work with you. That's why you're winning cases in court or whatever it may be. So try to, I'd say, embrace yourself, embrace those emotions, but you obviously have to have a level of professional maturity. You really do. And you have to have a level of emotional intelligence that you have to keep in mind. And again, I don't have any terrific, one trick to resolve these types of things, because as I said, I'm still trying to master them myself. But just keep in mind that it gets easier, and learn from others too. I think someone mentioned earlier is just mentors. One of the best things that ever happened to me was being a part of the HMBA and learning how to assimilate my Latinidad and my professional work, to the previous question, and just getting mentors and seeing how they navigate things. So I think that's one of the best things you can possibly do, is have a mentor. Be comfortable with yourself and give yourself grace, and just keep in mind that you'll keep growing, and navigating these issues will become easier.
All right, thank you. Let's, I think we've got, how much time? A couple minutes. I like this one. This might be a quick hit. We're going to go to Maria on this because she speaks Spanish much better than I can.
Mhm.
If you speak Spanish to a colleague in the workplace, and maybe this is not the best question for you because you are in Miami where everybody speaks Spanish, but if you speak Spanish to a colleague in the workplace around other colleagues who do not speak Spanish, does that come off as unprofessional,
I
even
mean,
if the conversation is casual?
it's wrong. It's wrong. You know, while I am in Miami and there are a lot of people that speak Spanish, in my workplace, there's always a combination of people, and I don't do it. I think it's not, the other individual has no idea what you're saying. I mean, I don't know those ladies out there that get their nails done with Asians, that start talking and you wonder if they're talking about you. So I always perceive that people are going to feel that way, not understanding what I'm saying. So I really, even though I'm a very fluent Spanish speaker, and obviously I'm around a lot of Hispanics in my workplace, I do not speak Spanish when I have some of my colleagues around me that don't understand Spanish. And if I catch myself doing it, I will apologize. I said, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that you were here and this is what I was saying. And I will actually even translate what I said. So I find it completely rude to do that.
All right, good. We have two more questions. I don't think we're going to have time to get to them. We're just going to go one round robin, your number one rule, each and every one of us. And then we're going to end. For those individuals, including, who's it, Marcos Izquierdo, why don't you email us your questions? We will answer them. And you've got some of the best mentors in the world amongst these individuals here. And one of us will get it. We'll email the others. We'll get your response for sure. So starting with the judge, last word. What's your number one rule, your number one pet peeve, whatever it may be? Leave them with one thought.
All right. I mean, I'm going to say don't interrupt as a basic fundamental rule. Wait, you're going to get your chance.
Maria?
Well, Mariana talked about, I'm very much into think about what your brand is. What do you want to be known for? And whenever you do anything, ask if it's consistent with that. So think about that.
Mariana, you get the last word.
Switch it into a little bit of a positive, but I just think one of the things that I love the most about people is when they're considerate and thoughtful and respectful. I think that is probably, and you could be not those things, but choose to kind of focus on what I do like.
I'll leave you with one last thing, and that is bad behavior, whether it's drinking too much, being a jerk, being rude. The good behavior may not make a difference, but the bad behavior can sink your career, can sink your job opportunity, can sink your ability to get a client. So, this stuff is really important. It's a bigger deal than you think it is. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for asking these great questions. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to Mia and Carla and the HMBA for putting this wonderful presentation together.